I think to become a real superhero, you have to encounter death in some way, because to really come to life, really, like Eckhart Tolle talks about people coming into the moment. But actually, to really go into the moment, you have to realize that we could die at any moment, and we're going to die at some moment. And that last moment will be like, we will review our whole life. It will seem like a moment. And so actually, we have to live each moment like it was the only moment.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Steve Stein, and I'm the host of the StreetSmart Wisdom Podcast, founder of Better Listen and WisdomFeed. And we have the great honor and privilege and all that good stuff to have Professor Bob Thurman. I've been working with him almost for 4 decades now. He's a Buddhist scholar, amazing thinker, amazing storyteller, just all around very, very happy and appreciative to have him here today. And he has a new book, Wisdom is Bliss. And welcome, Professor Bob Thurman. Is it Robert Thurman? Bob Thurman, right?
Bob is fine. Bob is fine. Hi, Steve. How are you? Nice to see you and your friends.
Yeah, it's cool. And there's some people watching on the stream as well.
Oh, good.
So we'll get into it in more depth a little later, but tell us a little bit about your book.
Oh, the Wisdom is Bliss book? Okay, yeah. Well, it's a fun book that I wrote. It's called Wisdom is Bliss, 4 friendly fun facts that can change your life is the subtitle. And the original title, working title of it was Buddhas Have More Fun. Not Buddhists, but Buddhas. And then the fun wandered into the subtitle, because you discuss that with editors, your title. And the Noble Truths, friendly fun facts are what I like to call the 4 Noble Truths, which Buddha was taught. And when Buddha taught, there was no Buddhism. There was just Buddha going around, and he had this new idea for people in India of his day, Vedist India of his day. And he was friendly to people. He liked them. And he had good news for them. And the good news is that if you understand yourself and the world, then you will be really happy. You will be free from suffering. I mean, really happy in the sense of you will not suffer. The only way you will still connect to suffering is you will be aware of other people's suffering, and you will be very capable of doing something about it, because you will find out that you actually love other people, and therefore you will be really friendly. So, when he called them noble truths, it was only because that had the idea, and the word was Arya, which has gotten a bad reputation since Hitler, but actually it's not, was a term for, it was kind of a class term in Buddha's time, and he turned it into a spiritual term of meaning someone who is altruistic. So, nowadays we don't necessarily think of noble as altruistic, we might think of them as oppressive. So, in fact, an altruistic person is going to be friendly to you because they will care for you. So when your friends they'll care for you, so you feel they are friendly, and that's what that means, altruistic to us.
And
truth can be thought of as a proposition, and so whereas like some kind of thing that you say, but actually these are facts of life from the Buddha's point of view, and he was giving a good prognosis, if you will, or a diagnosis and prognosis of people's prospects in life. And he was saying, if you understand yourself and your world, which you are capable of, which was an interesting encouragement from him, then you'll be really happy. And nowadays people teach Buddhism too much, emphasizing suffering, They talk about, misery and, you're bound to suffer. And so people wrongly think that the Buddhists are only into suffering, and that's completely wrong. Buddha said, the reason Buddha mentioned that you'll suffer if you don't know what you are is to get people to learn what they are, which they can.
Oh,
And they can find
interesting.
that out.
I have two questions for you.
Yeah.
You said the first word was the word Aryan that got a bad.
Yeah, Arya has a really bad reputation. So yeah, because of Hitler, some also the swastika, which means in Sanskrit, it's all good. Suastika, suasti, asti is the verb to be, and su stands short for sukha, happy. So goodness, So swastika is a good symbol. So the idiot Hitler was told by a traveler in Asia about the yin yang symbol, the ancient yin yang symbol, which is the swastika, which means male, female, and union, so something good, and usually, and then also the concept Arya, which was a racial term about 1,000 years before Buddha's time. But by the time Buddha lived in India, it was a class term, and it meant an upper class person. And then Buddha made it mean, he said, you're not a superior type by just being born in an upper class. You can be a better type, a noble person, by the way you treat others and how you are. If you're friendly and nonviolent and wise and so forth, then you can be called noble, which was the Arya word. So I'm rehabilitating the word noble by calling it friendly. Nice. And then I'm rehabilitating the 4 facts because they're like a medical diagnosis. If you want to be an idiot and self-centered and egotistical and narcissistic, then you'll suffer. And there's a reason for that and a psychological analysis of it, and a way of understanding it. And then if you understand yourself better and you understand your relationships better, then you will be happy. You'll live in nirvana and freedom from suffering. And then there's an education system to help you do that. So that's why my book is titled Wisdom is Bliss, because if you know what reality is, you're going to be happy. That's the thing.
Wow. So we're going in the second part of this talk, we're going to get a little bit more into that. But you said one thing, ancient ideas. So so a little bit about myself. Again, privilege and honor to be working with Bob Thurman for almost 4 decades. Yikes. And I could just like sit down and listen, but we have a podcast to do. So I'm going to kind of circle back. You mentioned ancient ideas. Sure.
Yeah.
So one of the things, so I have Better Listen, where I've been publishing audiobooks for decades. And we recently started WisdomFeed. And the objective of WisdomFeed is to take ancient ideas down to street level. To make it practical, so for people that never make it to Omega or never make it to Menla, my friends from Brooklyn that I grew up with. So one of the things we do here is we have, I call it a wisdom profile, because people who know who you are, but a lot of the world doesn't. So we're going to go through a couple, if you have anything to say, you could say it now, but then we're going to go through, I'm going to ask you a few questions.
Yeah, no, ask me a question. Go. No, I don't have anything to say. I'm happy to be silent even.
I like it.
But not good on a podcast. That doesn't work well.
So, who are you? Where were you born? And I know
I was born in the doctor's hospital in this life. In the doctor's hospital on East 90th Street, right near the Gracie Square and the mayor's house in New York City, on what's now York Avenue, actually, and 90th Street. But they destroyed that hospital, Beth Israel North, it then was after being doctor's hospital. So right in Manhattan. And I think my parents were living in Sutton Place at that time, but I don't remember that place. I remember living at 124 East 81st Street between Lexington Park and a brownstone that also has been destroyed since then. And then I went away at 12 to a boarding school in New Hampshire. And then I was really never at home in New York since then until 1988. So for about 20, 30 years, I was in Massachusetts. And then I'm back in New York since 88. And because of Tibet House, which we founded in New York to preserve Tibetan culture, kind of cultural embassy for the Tibetan people. And then also teaching at Columbia, training about 30 graduate students over the years, over 30 years.
Where'd you go to high school?
I went to Phillips Exeter boarding school.
And where would, if you had stayed in Manhattan, where would you have gone?
Who knows? I have no idea.
Who knows? It's a long time ago.
I come from what you could call impoverished gentry, and families in the hinterland. Father's side in the South, mother's side in Pittsburgh area, and grandfather was gambled on real estate and impoverished himself. And so we didn't, my mother was modest and father were modest of means. But she was, I guess, because she considered we were gentry, she put me in private schools where I got scholarships because I was clever. But I never felt at home, actually. I always felt like I belonged in another culture. And I finally realized and discovered that when I was about 20. And I discovered Buddhism and India and Tibet. And then I knew where I really was, really belonged.
So how did you discover it? And try to look to the screen to your right a little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
So how did you
Well, I discovered it with books. I read about it. There was not really much teaching. I never graduated from Exeter because I ran away in my senior year, just before graduation, to join Castro's revolution with some Latin American friends. But unfortunately, or luckily, actually, probably for me, they didn't accept my conscription. I tried to sign up, and I flew to Miami Beach from New Hampshire with a Mexican friend, and they laughed at us. My friend was short and round, and he weighed more than me, and I was tall. I was 1 foot taller, and I was thin. So they laughed and said, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza have come to save the revolution. So then they laughed and said we'd be killed in a minute. We didn't even know they were communists, We just thought he was a poet. And my friends, actually, from that kind of a fancy boarding school, they were right-winger types, But they wanted to rebel, and to do something poetic. And so I never graduated, but I had already been accepted in college. So the college people made me wait a year, and then they admitted me as a sophomore, which they never would do nowadays. But the dean of admission said, well, you didn't graduate high school, and you didn't go in the army, and you're a wild man, but you're smart, and you're already a sophomore, so who cares? We'll let you in, or you'd go to waste, he said.
And that was at Columbia?
No, Harvard.
Oh, Harvard, of course.
And so then I didn't graduate there either. And my senior year, or late junior, early senior year, I lost an eye, and in a motor accident, which was very lucky. It was just a garage accident, working on a car, and I used to race them, so I could have easily been killed. I was a bit reckless teenager, and or just turned 20. And that then shock of impermanence made me decide that my restlessness meant I needed to find a better teaching about the nature of reality than either Western religion or Western science, materialist science. So in looking, I discovered the Buddha's teaching, and actually was drawn to India. I thought Buddha's teaching should be in India. And I was not one of those who had a sort of instant thing about Tibet. I was more toward India. So anyway, I went there, and but then I found that the Indians had forgotten about Buddhism. But the Tibetans were there, and they just started escaping. This is 1961, 62.
Wow.
And the Tibetans knew all about it. And the minute I met them, that was it, Then I was home,
Right. So that was in India when you met them.
Yes, they had just escaping.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Chinese communists.
And when was the first time you actually, I guess, went in China, when you actually,
No, not in China. No, I met him in India.
right,
Well,
but
then a strange thing happened, which is that my dad died, had a heart attack, and was mishandled by various medics, and was revived, but then did pass away. And um, so I was called back from my pilgrimage in India by my mother with a round trip ticket back to India because I did not intend to go back to American culture. And but while I was back, just as a sort of traveler, because I was already into being a wandering mendicant, So then I happened to hear about a Lama in New Jersey. Not down near Bruce Springsteen's area,
oh,
in the Pine Flats of New Jersey, down near Lakewood and those areas, Freehold, Lakewood, and so I went there 2 days before my return flight to India. But then the man I met there, who was Mongolian but from Tibet, I just flipped me out, and he became my teacher for a couple of years. And I learned the language in 10 weeks. I was fluently speaking. It was really like almost a miracle. And then after a while, he took me back to the Dalai Lama in India, it's in exile in India. So that's how I became friendly with Dalai Lama in 1964, after about 2 years of teaching, learning the language and learning from the Lama. So it was funny. I went all the way to India to find a guru, found him in New Jersey from New York, found him 1.5 hours from New York and New Jersey. But then he took me back to the Tibetan community in India, which is Tibet in exile, Dharamsala. That's where I became a monk, He didn't want me to be a monk. He said, it's a bad idea. You shouldn't be a monk. Not because you don't want to be, and not because you can't be, but because there's no institution for you. Tibetan one was destroyed by the communists, and there's no Tibetan Buddhist monastery to speak of in America. There was nobody, there was no people in America, much, and there wasn't even any Hare Krishnas at that time. 62, nothing. So I didn't realize that being a monk or a mendicant is a social thing. It depends on a society where they'll support you. And
so how long were you a monk for?
Well, I lived as a monk for about 3.5 years. I was formally ordained for the last 1.5 of those years, because Dalai Lama didn't listen to the old monk, the old Mongolian geshe. When he took me there, he said to Dalai Lama, "This boy is very smart. He already speaks Tibetan, and please help him study more. But he wants to be a monk, and he's desperate and determined to be a monk. But please don't make him a monk." Which I was mad at him, because he promised to take me there, that maybe the Lama would make me a monk. But then the minute he introduced me, he said, "Don't make him a monk." But then he said, "Well, you're the Dalai Lama, you decide." So then the Dalai Lama was salute. It took him time. Then he took time, getting to know me, and then he did make me a monk anyway. It's part of the thing. And then I did last. So,
Wow, so were you one of the first people from this part of the world to meet him?
Well, yeah, a few people had met him before, but Europeans, and then Houston Smith had met him before me, as he informed me before he passed away. He had met him because he was going around recording these chantings, for the monks with this world religion thing. And I thought that was after I got there, but that was actually before me. And then he met him and chatted with him, and he recorded the monks with their the monks will go like that, and it has a polyphonic sound. And but then I was probably one of the first. I met him before Thomas Merton did, and I guess I was the first one who already spoke Tibetan, and who got to be a kind of pal of his, actually, because he downloaded my Exeter, Harvard, what little knowledge I had about life, which he was more interested than teaching me Buddhism. He referred me to the older teachers that he was himself studying with at the time. He was only 6 years older. So we became buddies ever since then. 58 years we've been buddies, 58 years.
Wow.
And actually, he shocked me just the other day. I met him again at Dharamsala, and we hadn't seen each other since COVID. since 2019, and we had a very warm meeting. But he greeted me by saying, "Old friend, we've been doing this life after life," he said, "and we'll continue life after life." And then I was a little freaked out because I thought maybe he was signaling he might pass away or something, which is not the plan. He's promised the Tibetan people to live to 110. And then he ordered me to stay until 104, which is that age. I'm only 81, I'm a youngster of 81. So I was a little shocked because I thought maybe either he or me were going to actually go. And so I said, well, wait a minute. Yes, life after life, but we got 20 more years to put in now, don't we? Yeah, right. He says, like,
Right.
He didn't, I think he's a little tired of the body, but he's going to hang in, and he can. He has the ability. But his knees doesn't work. He doesn't like to walk. He can't do much walking because the knee is bad, and he doesn't like his hearing aids. He was like fiddling with his ear all the time, And I tried to give him one of mine. I said, "Here," and he refused. I don't think he had a good hearing aid. They got him one of these things that you put way inside, which so you don't see it. But who cares if you see it? I have what are called hearing amplifiers, which are not expensive, and they're excellent, except where there's a loud noise, they're a little annoying. And so I offered to him mine, but he declined.
That's amazing. First-hand stories, incredible. So we have kind of a sense of who you are now.
Well, no, not yet. I didn't quite finish because my third major guru. So my major guru was the Geshe Wangyal, the Mongolian. I call him nowadays, because I'm working on a biography, I call him my Mr. Miyagi, because he sort of looks like the guy in the Karate Kid.
Wax on, wax off.
Something like that, but he didn't teach me martial arts, but mental,
But that's
then Dalai Lama became, so definitely when he grew up and I grew a little more, he became my big guru. And then my wife is my third big guru, because then I fell in love after I resigned as a monk, not in order to do that, but I resigned when I realized that my original teacher was correct, and there was no place to be a monk in America in 1965, 66. And everybody was protesting the war and et cetera, all my colleagues, and dealing with the human rights, in the South, the human rights and Martin Luther King and the whole thing. So I couldn't hide out and be a monk. I had to be engaged. So I resigned for that reason. And then shortly after that, I did fall in love with my beautiful wife. And she took pity on me. And we were the ex-monk and the ex-model. And we were the least likely to succeed 56 years ago. We were said to be by all our friends, coming from two opposite worlds, so to speak. But we've been having fun for most of the time, ups and downs, but most of the time, 56 years. And she taught me so much about life, also that no Lama could teach you. at least no formal Lama. I think she is the kind of Lama, but she absolutely rejects that claim herself. She's just a human being. But anyway, she's my third guru, so that's who I am. I'm now a father and a grandfather, I have two great-granddaughters.
Wow, no kidding. Great-grandfather.
So two small great-granddaughters. Last one, most recent one, who's not yet quite a year, is their parents, without prompting, named her Gaia. So that I was very pleased about, because since I retired from Columbia 3 years ago, just before COVID really set in, I've been trained by Al Gore, and I give the environment like Inconvenient Truth, the recent version of Inconvenient Truth lecture at the drop of a hat. And I'm a Greta Thunberg fan, and that's my main preoccupation as a sort of public person. I'm very, we can't really, as Greta says, we can't really sell her future and wreck her future, and the future of my great-granddaughter. So I was delighted that the great-granddaughter is called Gaia. I really was. Okay, beautiful. That's me. Okay, what's the next question?
I love it. So it's the perfect segue. So what do you do? I mean, I know you're an author, and now you're at this stage. Do you feel like you need to, well, you've always been a brilliant light with whatever you were talking about.
Well, that's nice, dear. Thank you.
No, and then,
My children don't tell me that.
well, of course not. Just like, yes, that I get. So what do you do? You're an educator. So what are you going to go to 104 you're planning on? So in this next phase, what do you see, how do you see yourself, in retirement, and what's your function?
Well, actually, COVID was interesting in the sense that, I'm from an older generation, so I'm not a natural Facebook person or Twitter or whatever it might be, on the internet. But the thing I have not retired from is something called Tibet House US, and which is part of a network of Tibet houses around the world, which are sort of like cultural. They're not Dharma centers, they're like cultural embassies for the existence of the Tibetan people as a free people. The Tibetans are sort of like, in relation to the Chinese, are sort of like the Ukrainians in relation to the Russians. That is to say, they are not Chinese, like the Ukrainians are not Russian. Actually, the Tibetans are much less connected to the Chinese than the Ukrainians are culturally connected to the Russians, because Ukraine is at sea level altitude, like Russia, whereas Tibet is at 3 miles high average altitude, and they are, and Chinese people can't live there year round without getting chronic mountain sickness. No, you have to be born there or live there for 4 or 5 generations to be able to live on 47% of sea level oxygen. And so as in gratitude, because the Tibetan Buddhist way of life, you could call it, I'm not a fanatic religious person in the sense of I don't live on just belief in something. I live in how to experience the way you experience life, and I'm very grateful that whatever I learned from Tibetan culture and Tibetan yoga and things like that, and Tibetan philosophy and science, psychology, made me happier. And people I know who use it without necessarily changing, like, for example, Jewish people remain Jewish. We call the famous Jew-boos. I have a lot of rabbi friends, and I always kid with them. And they know they can call me as a referral if any of the Jew-boos show up at a synagogue and tell them, I'm sorry, Rabbi, I'm just a boo now. No, I'm no longer a Jew-boo. We prefer, Dalai Lama has a big thing. He converted me to not converting people over our 60 years of knowing each other, that it's too late. And he told 3 popes he hasn't converted them quite. They're still trying to convert people. And Muslim leaders also, mullahs of different types. And he's trying to everybody to make a pledge that the world religions should stop competing for market share, so to speak. And they should instead compete to see how excellent and how spiritual their followers can learn to be, which means kind and compassionate and nonviolent and et cetera, respectful of others and all that, and happy, actually. And so, and individual Christians and Muslims and Hindus, the Hindus have heartily agreed with that. And the leaders, the Shankaracharyas and people. So he's been sort of peddling that idea, and he's very serious. He made recently a big statement in the David Bohm movie, who was one of his favorite conversation partners over the years. I knew him too. We used to chat together, all of us. And he said, never in my life have I given a lecture in a general audience with the motive about Buddhism, some aspect of it, or some practice even, but my motive has never been to convert the people to Buddhism. My motive has been to share something useful, to encourage them in whatever their grandmother's religion is, which I think people should do that, because otherwise grandma will be unhappy. If you were born a nice Jewish kid and had a bar mitzvah and everything, and then suddenly you're a Buddhist, what is that? Like, and they don't know. So he thinks culturally they can do, but they should learn to meditate if they like to, or some philosophical or psychological thing. That's all fine. Similarly, he wants to learn from Jewish. He has so many rabbi friends, had so many conferences with them to learn how they kept the culture in thousands of years of exile, which he's worried Tibetans won't be able to do that if it goes on for more generations from the Chinese genocide that they're doing in Tibet. And so he likes to lesson from that. From Christians, he likes to learn about how the monastics, they found hospitals and colleges, and they do things. The Indians, Buddhists did have big universities, and the Tibetan Buddhists do have universities. They teach lay people as well as monks. They did in the past. But he thinks that the Catholics are really good at the hospitals, and the Protestants are also kind, supporting them. But the Catholics, especially the nuns, are wonderful nurses and teachers, and they're tremendous. And he very much admires that. So, and he likes to learn yoga and things from Hindus. So he likes people to mutually share their techniques and their practices and learn what the other ones believe, but then all meet on the ground of what he calls the one common human religion, which is kindness. And he includes actually the secular people as a world religion of humanism. And he doesn't think they should be thought of as heretics and whatever, atheists in a bad sense, but they can be thought of as humanists, and they are kind of world religion. And they have 1 billion followers, he believes, secularists, So he's very into that. So anyway, I have learned kind of over the years not to be fanatical about Buddhism, although I am grateful to it. And I was not really a card-carrying Christian before that, nor was I a card-carrying atheist. I was just a seeker, And I really love the Buddhist science, actually. I consider Buddha a good scientist, actually, rather than starting some belief system.
I think about 30 or 40 years ago, dating myself, that you had these recordings. I think it was John Dwork in Amherst. You had all these scientific, all these scientists. It was a series of lectures and conferences. I think David Bohm was one of the speakers. So those are phenomenal. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, sure. You recorded those kind of things at Open Center and at Omega and so on. Sure. I gave a series of lectures in the 80s in San Francisco called Buddhism Without Buddhism. And it was going to be published by Parallax Press. And then they suddenly realized that they were Buddhists. So I've been recycling them, but some other people recorded that, and they were pretty well known on the West Coast. Those lectures.
Are those still around, those lectures?
And I was supporting people like Kabat-Zinn and others who, were trying to share mindfulness as a healing practice without making people Buddhists, which he makes a big fuss about that in his wonderful mindfulness teaching, long mindfulness teaching that he's done. And I was supporting that. Some Buddhists were still they act like, oh, no, that belongs to Buddhism. You shouldn't really be doing that unless you're a Buddhist. But I don't agree with that. I think, you can offer the methods if they help people, and they don't have to be a Buddhist to use them, It's just because a lot of it is common sense. Buddha's thing is not anti-rational at all, and it's not a matter of a fanatic belief. He thinks that a belief that's a blind faith belief is actually crippling to the human mind, and that then people will accept all kinds of irrational things if they get to where they feel they have to believe something that doesn't make sense to them. So Buddhism is like that. It doesn't promote blind faith belief. Only it's reasonable belief.
That's very cool. Because my brother's a Jew, Boo, out in Eugene, Oregon.
I see.
So he's been into it for a long time. Big
That's
follower.
Great. Ramdas. He was a Hindu. But by the time he passed away, he decided to be a Hindu Jew, because I persuaded him that he could be both, Hindu and Buddhist, because he asked me, he consulted me, because somebody, I think Mark Epstein it was, who told him he thought I could help him, because he had this problem where he said, well, I'm a Hindu, and I want to have a soul, because I want to go join the one and all this kind of thing. But then all my friends are Buddhists, like Sharon and Joan Halifax, et cetera, all they're all Buddhists. And she said, and they say I can't have a soul. So what can I do? I like them, but they're against that. So then I said, well, so it wasn't really I helped him. I just reminded him of a great teacher named Yogi Berra.
Love Yogi Berra.
And I said, Ram Dass, follow Yogi Berra. When you come to a fork in the road, take it.
Nice.
And he just loved that. He went around that whole retreat like, oh, no, I'm happy. But Dalai Lama says I can have a soul. It's not a problem as long as I don't get fixated one like absolute Ram Dass. I realize I'm one with everyone, something like that. So then he was fine. We had a great. I think Buddha didn't never taught there's no soul, because Buddha was not a materialist. He was into former and future life, because you can't become a Buddha, like a magical being, teacher of humans and gods, as they call Deva Manushyanam Shasta. You can't do that if you don't have a few lives to work on it. It takes a little while to evolve to that kind of a being from a normal street person in New York City.
Amazing. So all this conversation is really mirroring my whole kind of raison d'etre these days, taking ancient ideas down to street level. And I actually interviewed Yogi Berra a couple of times years ago.
You're kidding, really?
And Ram Dass, because I do a lot of sports publishing and promotion, social media. Yeah,
did Yogi come up with any other great things? Like, did he come up with any new great sayings on your interview?
Oh yeah, no one he'll talk about a restaurant. No one goes there; it's too crowded. No one goes there; it's too crowded.
That's a good one.
He has a bunch of yogis. I have the book up here as well.
Oh, John. What's the best Yogi Berra saying book, actually? I don't know if I have that. I'd like to look up more of his saying. What is the best Yogi Berra Buddha book?
Here, let me show you.
There are various versions of Yogi Berra.
I was not planning on this.
But I don't think it was that good. Oh,
here's my Yogi Berra book.
I really didn't say everything I said. Is that your book, you say?
Yeah. He signed it. He signed it when it came out.
Well, yay. Okay, I'm going to get that one. So he's the author, in other words.
Yeah.
I look it up. I
wish I had an answer to that, because I'm tired of answering that question. I usually take a 2-hour nap from 1 to 4.
That's totally great. Okay. So I looked
it up. If you ask me a question I don't know, I'm not going to answer. Anyway,
hold it up one more time. Will you hold it up one more time? I just want to
of course. And I will talk a little so you can see it big.
It's the Yogi book, and the Yogi book. Yogi Berra.
Yeah. Okay. And it's here's a quote.
I'll find it. I don't have that one. I have one I don't like that much. Okay.
90% of the game is half mental.
I'm telling you, Ram Dass was really grateful to Yogi Berra. He really solved his problem about soul and no soul, because this Atma Anatma is just an approach with different kinds of people. Buddha taught Atma sometimes. He taught Anatma sometimes when it was better for someone. Buddha was a dialogical teacher. He would teach people what they needed. He didn't have some dogmas he wanted to inflict on them, is my point,
Right.
And so that's really cool, Yogi Berra. Thank you, Steve. Okay, so what's next? What's the next question?
So I'm going to try to do this real quick. So behind me, can you see the
Kala Chakra Mandala? Sure.
That's from when we recorded His Holiness at Madison Square Garden. That was incredible.
Oh, you did? Oh, great. Oh, you have the whole Kala Chakra initiation there, you mean?
Yeah, and all the guest lectures and Richard Gere and all that. That was incredible. Great. But 20 hours.
Oh, wonderful.
And here's just this is from the first 10 years of the Open Center.
Oh, great.
I did all the recordings outside of
yes.
after college. And then I'm very fortunate. I do a lot of work with John Kabat-Zinn. So he did this video for hospitals,
Yes.
mindfulness in the
Yes.
hospitals. And,
Wonderful.
and look how all this is. It's from it's like they don't make this anymore. But so I'm fortunate to work with him. And then
That's great, Steve. Yes.
And then
Wonderful.
back there's a picture of Springsteen and the Grateful Dead. And so how did you, we'll wind up this section. I know it's going too long. You let me know how long.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
Great. So how did you connect one of my pictures, Springsteen, the Dead, and when I was recording His Holiness at Madison Square Garden, someone came up to me and said, there's going to be a conference in the jungles of Brazil, the First World Conference of Indigenous Peoples. And so I went and recorded that.
Oh, great.
And that,
Wonderful.
that was the first time Indigenous people from every continent were in the same place.
Really? Where in Brazil was that? It
was just outside of Rio. Didn't they have the first Earth Summit? And wonderful. Then I think Bush 1 just went there for 10 minutes and didn't support the environment or something like that.
Yeah.
But it was global. Anyway, that's a little bit about me. I hope I'm not boring anyone, but
no, that's all right. So I'm interested. That's very good.
To finish this segment, I have a question for you.
Yes.
If you were a superhero,
yes,
what would be your origin story? Was there some inciting incident that got you going?
Well, a loss of my eye was a very important one.
Amazing.
Because I did realize you have to develop a different kind of sight. I mean, my other eye still worked pretty well. And my mother had amazing eyes. I think we had sharpshooters in our history because we were my mother had extraordinary eyesight until she was around 50. But then she had to correct it. But so that the eyesight was it was to counter with death, I think. I think to become a real superhero, you have to encounter death in some way, because to really come to life, really, like Eckhart Tolle talks about people coming into the moment, but actually to really go into the moment, you have to realize that we could die at any moment, and we're going to die at some moment, and that last moment will be like, we will review our whole life. It will seem like a moment. And so actually we have to live each moment like it was the only moment. But then I had once lunch with Eckhart in an Italian restaurant, and very good pasta in California. And he agreed with me when I said, he should be cautious with only coming into the now with American materialists, because American materialists will use the now to imagine being disconnected from the past and the future. And so they don't have to worry about because they're very anxious, almost worrying about the future. And then they have almost some degree of bitterness about something didn't work out in the past. And they're stuck with that because they don't think there's any future life. They think everything that's going to happen is happening in this life, because they believe the nonsense from the scientists, the materialist scientists, as if the scientists had discovered that there's no future life, which is nonsense. That's only a dogmatic view that they take in order to try to escape from religion, because they're scared of God, and preachers in the name of God telling them to be senseless. So I don't blame them from trying to escape. But on the other hand, they come up with a new one, which is nothingness is God. That is, everybody's going to the arms of nothingness when they die. They act like they discovered that. Do you realize that cannot be discovered? After years of debating with natural scientists in academic setting, myself, who what they do is they come on to you, they hear you're a Buddhist, they say, "Oh, you don't believe that crap about former and future life, do you?" They say that. And then you get defensive and you say, yeah, sure. A lot of people remember former lives. So then they, oh, that's useless. That's not evidence. That's just anecdotal. They'll say it the best, they'll say that. It's superstition, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, finally, I learned after 20 years or so, 25 years of that, guys, wait a minute. Okay, that's anecdotal because nobody discovered former future life you're trying to say, so it's blind faith. Okay, that's your argument. But let me ask you this. Who discovered the nothingness you're sure you're going to? Who discovered that? And they actually roll their eyes like trying to remember somebody. Like, who got the Nobel Prize for the empirical discover of nothing? They'll say it was some mathematician, so they'll try to think of somebody. They won't even realize this insanity of the question and of the answer. Obviously, that's the one thing nobody's going to discover. It's not there. It's only a concept for what isn't there. Therefore, you can't go there. There's no there. So they have the thermodynamic law of the conservation of energy. Energy is never completely destroyed, it just changes form. And maybe there's entropy where it scatters over space, in space. But the point is, nothingness is not space. Nothingness is nothing. Okay, it's not a volume. There's no volume in nothingness. It's nothing. It's not there. So the blind faith in nothing, which is the materialist, atheist level of thinking it's all this life, the illusion of being a spirit or a mind in this life, that is complete blind faith. And it's much more sensible, like Moses, believe in a burning bush. Come on. The bush is talking, at least, telling you to go see Pharaoh. Do you know what I mean? It's making more sense. That's more reasonable. I mean, maybe the bush is making certain claims, like, I'm going to tell Pharaoh not to agree with you, but go talk to him anyway. Well, if Moses knew he was dealing with a relational being, he might question that, But the rabbis question it for sure. In the Midrash, they have a lot of jokes about it, but never mind. So my point is that the nonsense of materialism is one of my main things as a scientist, that Buddha's discovery that the soul, which is a continuum, not a fixed thing, it's not like a barcode, it doesn't always, you're not reborn always as a Jubu or a Boo or a whatever, an atheist. You're not going to be reborn as human. You're not going to be reborn always as a female or a male. You don't know what you're going to be reborn as if you don't know how to manage if you're not a lucid dreamer, if you don't know how to control your dreams to avoid nightmares, you don't know where you're going when you die. And the false assurance by science that you just are exempt from sensation, that is to say, you become anesthetized for eternity and you don't worry about anything because you're not there, is a fake. So they're selling a fake indulgence that how you can be Putin, you can kill millions of people with a stroke of the pen, or drop a bomb like Truman, and it won't follow. That act won't follow you, its consequences, into a future life. It's not like somebody, you don't have to believe that some particular person is going to punish you, some omnipotent person. You don't have to believe that. But that the consequence of we all know, if we're mean to people, they'll dislike us and we'll have a hard time with them, if we rob them or oppress them and something. So we know there's consequences of how you behave in our immediate relational setting. So why wouldn't there be ultimate consequences about all of our relational acts that go on beyond the relational event of dying, which means just like falling asleep, you leave your big body, your coarse body, but then you rise in a dream state in between, and then you luckily wake up back in the body, hopefully. But you don't know what could happen. So I'm just saying, I'm into it as a scientific thing, not as a blind faith belief, And that's pretty much, that's what I like to do nowadays. So what I'm doing now, and the final question, what I do now is I try to continue teaching online. I continue writing books. I continue translating the wonderful scientific books. When I got my PhD, the Dalai Lama and my Mr. Miyagi, Geshe Wangyal, they ganged up on me. And they said, during your teaching career, we don't want you just teaching people working in their school only. We want you to translate the whole tenure, which are 4,600 books from more than 1,000 years of the great Buddhist monastic university in India, Nalanda. Its library, the cream of its library, were translated into Tibetan in a very flawless way with concordance and so on. Before the Muslim invasion of India, they burned that library, and they burned 100 libraries about like the 100 libraries of Alexandria they burned. So they no longer existed in India, and therefore they're no longer accessible outside the Tibetan and Mongolian world. So they told, that's what you have to do. And then I complained and said, come on, I can't do that in one life. And they said, yeah, well, you have to go on for 3 generations. So you set up an institution and other people will finish later in 3 generations. So that's also Tibet House, where we're trying to save Tibetan culture. We're also working on doing that translation. And that's what I am doing. That's my main thing. And it involves also continuing to teach people new discoveries. And the other great thing that's fun that people don't realize, and that's your beginner's mind you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so
that is, the great guy who did beginner's mind, the Zen guy, Suzuki Roshi, who passed away a long time ago, but he made a wonderful statement. Oh, yes, everything is perfect. He said, of course, but there's always a little room for improvement. I love that. So, I admit I've learned a lot from the Buddha Dharma and from studying things for 60 years and more, 65, maybe 68 years, and 65 years. But I'm still learning more. And I don't consider that that's a problem. Like I might have early on expected that something would go pop in my brain and then I'd automatically know everything. Maybe Buddhahood may be like that, but it may not be a pop in the brain. But meanwhile, I enjoy learning more. And now that I know more of history of Buddhism, all the great superhero siddhas, we call them the mahasiddhas, people like, these kind of people who can do miracles and things, they're always also learning more. So they maintain an open mind, because enlightenment is not coming up with some dogma, oh, that's the final theory or something. Enlightenment is becoming completely open-minded and even open-bodied, where you feel you are many beings. So you're totally empathetic and you identify with others 100%, and you feel their feeling, and you feel inside they have a deep bliss in their heart. A bliss of life is their health, and their vital energy is like a bliss energy, which is really what they're made of. You apparently see that. And then you also notice how they're not satisfied and they're suffering and they are confused. And so you reach out to them almost automatically. And they say a Buddha can be many bodies to reach out to many beings simultaneously. So, and I think that's reasonable to try for that anyway. I haven't achieved that, but I think it's reasonable to try for it. So I'm working on that. And then, since it takes a long time for a lot of people, and since the mother lode of this science is in Tibet, because it was driven out of India, and most of those scientific books were not translated into Chinese, so they didn't go to Japan and China and so on. So I think that's my life work, and probably the next few lives. Actually, Dalai Lama shocked me 50 years after telling me to do that. And we never discussed it again in some technical, because I didn't complain again about it. I was happy working on it. When he met the president of Colombia 5 years ago, he said, right, and had lunch with him, sits down at lunch, and he says, oh, Ali, Professor Thurman, he needs 3 lifetimes to finish his project. He says that after 50 years after telling me that. And I had more or less practically forgotten the incident. But then he says that to the president. And Ballinger's so smart. He says, oh, that's great, Your Holiness. Too bad here at Columbia, we don't have that reincarnation system.
Right. So,
and I was too shy, because I'm too stupid and shy. I didn't have enough beginner's mind to immediately interject. Why not? Why can't I reincarnate in my chair? What's the matter? But I didn't. Because I thought I wanted them to, gain rapport, talk to each other. So I was too shy.